So we kick off Module 1 talking about the ENS curriculum. The lecture topics or the lecture objectives, like my job, is to introduce the foundation sciences and the subdisciplines that are embedded in our curriculum. So what are just must-haves in what the students need to know to move on. We're also going to look at some of the specific courses that you're going to take. So in number 1, where we say subdisciplines, it's another way of saying your coursework. So for instance, if a subdiscipline of exercise science is biomechanics, yes, we're going to talk about your biomechanics class when we describe that subdiscipline. And the reason why is because I thought it might make sense to make you learn your degree requirements as we learn about just the general curriculum and academic areas within exercise and nutrition science. So with that, you guys, I took your course syllabi for every class, looked at what topics and different themes that they were using, and I developed ways to come up with sample lectures to give you a little glimpse of what you'll be learning in those courses. So I would expect you to be able to match some kind of topic with a course if given that on an exam. I guess I'm getting ahead. I'll go over your learning outcomes next. We'll also intend to provide an understanding of the interrelatedness of the curricular requirements. So basically, why do I have to take Psychology 101 before I take my motor learning and behavior class? Why do I have to take statistics before I take my upper division measurement and evaluation class? So you'll learn about why the courses are sequenced the way that they are and their interrelatedness, which I find a huge utility in that. When I was a student, I went through so many classes not understanding why. For instance, accounting. I had an accounting class. I was like, why? I'm studying the science of nutrition, but boy, did it involve a lot of math when it comes to food costing in institutional food settings. And I was like, now I understand. So I'm going to give that to you up front so you don't have to ask those questions when you're in those seemingly mundane, unrelated classes. We're also going to highlight the curricular differences between the programs. A few Kines programs we have, so I want to make sure I differentiate between them. And then also, like always, to introduce you to the other side of the fence, to talk with you about the different components of the nutrition curriculum. And then we will also look at pre-professional timelines and programs, how to get into athletic training, how to get into physical therapy, and what the curricular requirements are. Again, we're not talking about research here. That's Module 2. And Module 3, we talk about jobs. Here we're talking about coursework, classes, academic study. Bonus, and it will not be on your test, is we'll look at graduate programs. So some of you start to ask questions around this time. Hey, I heard SC has a biokines program, and I always use that one as my example because there's an assignment that's very popular. That's a popular choice. But regardless, you'll find programs that you have questions about. So we're also going to look at some of those, mostly in the next set of this lecture, not this one so much, a little bit. So your job, or what your learning outcomes are to list the core foundation sciences, which we'll go over. Like I mentioned, to be able to match courses when given the course name or course title, and given like you're going to learn this in what class, you should be able to match those because we're going to talk about it. I also want you to be able to identify and explain those prerequisite, co-requisite sequences, and also be able to differentiate between the graduate programs. So you can see how those align well with my objective. So hopefully this is how you'll demonstrate that you understood what I was trying to do. So looking first at the ENS core. So this is basically required for all of Bachelor's in Science programs in kinesiology. You're all going to take these GE foundation sciences that we handpicked to cross-satisfy GE because these are really important branches of science for your development. So lots in the natural sciences, in the formal sciences, and in the social and behavioral sciences. And we're going to talk about each one of these just shortly, individually. So let's take a look at biology. Our majors take a few different kinds of biology, and we're going to skip anatomy and physio because we're going to talk about those separately. But the basic, let's call them general biology classes that our students take are the general 100 with lab, the molecular, and the micro, which is 211 and 211 lab. Now, these are kind of random, especially for pre-PT students to have to take micro, but you needed 1 full year of biology, and this is the one that comes next in the sequence, so this is the one that you guys take. So nutrition students, though, you take micro because your area of study actually really involves a lot of microbiology. Keeping food microbiologically safe is something that you'll understand the principles of from this class. So we know that bacteria live in warm, moist surfaces. They combust nutrient energy just like humans do in some ways. And so they grow in our food, and temperature can be used to control that. So you'll learn that in your microbiology class, things like that. So definitely important for nutrition and foods because microbes love food just like they love us. A couple just advising tips on the topic of biology, registration priority. So you're always going to want to take biologies, and second to chems are registration priorities also, but once you get to a certain level, then biologies become the registration priority. You have to get done anatomy, which has these prerequisites before you can declare major. So biologies are always a registration priority, definitely okay at a community college, and definitely okay online, except labs. Labs are always better in person for PT school. Now, of course, right now we're in a unique situation, so labs will be accepted online at many graduate programs, and all that news will be unrolled as the time unfolds. But for now, we take what we can take, but in a real general setting, we want to just make sure we're taking labs in person. But typically the lectures online are just fine, and no one really frowns on those for physical therapy school or for your dietetic internships. Last little note on biology, if you're intending on medical school, you might also need organismal biology, which is 204 and 204 lab. Just a little biology trivia for fun. We're not learning this, but this would be equivalent to something you would learn in a general or molecular bio class. You might talk about DNA replication, DNA repair, and you might learn about the process of transcription and translation. And so maybe you already learned this in high school, but do you know if image A or image B depicts protein translation? Obviously, we're not doing this interactive in a live digital touchscreen interactive setting, so in your head, think about it, but I'll go ahead and give you the answer. Translation is the part where in the cell ribosome, there is a copying process where proteins are being made. And in the nucleus, up at the very, very tiny level, the transcription process or copying of the DNA to the messenger RNA takes place. So transcription in the nucleus, and then over in the ribosomes is the translation, where we're actually converting that to making proteins. So again, sample lessons. These are the kind of things that you'll learn in biology. Chemistry. All of our majors also require chemistry. You can see on screen which ones your major requires. Pre-PT needs the most by units because they have to take the big 5-unit General Chem series, 200 and 201. But foods and nutrition need the most number of chem classes. So they need the 100, the organic, and the biochemistry courses. And this is the most important sequence in the nutrition student program because these courses matriculate really specific. 100 prereqs 130, which is spring only, prerequisite to Chem 160, which oftentimes is fall only. So these are lockstep classes. What else can I say about chemistry? I guess some advising tips. They, like biology, are a registration priority. They're prereqs to some bio classes, and it's just you need to get those done to get out of the pre-major section. They're okay also at community college and in summer, and lectures are okay online, but never labs. You want to take those in person too. Again, times are strange right now. I know some of you have waivers to take your labs online and all sorts of exceptions and unique circumstances, but in ordinary times, just lectures, no labs online. So this is just a little chemistry fun trivia. Again, I don't expect you to know this. I just want to see I wanted to see what you do know. There's a process happening in this image, and it's kind of slow, but I want to see if you know what processes are taking place. It's a cellular process. It's showing a cellular compound. There's a reaction happening. So anyways, I'll go ahead and give you the answer. Oh, I didn't put it up there. It's both. So this reaction, if you remember, H2O is water, and they're letting go of one of their electrons to hydrolyze the phosphate. And so that's hydrolysis because water is breaking apart that molecule or that bond, and it's dephosphorylating. It's taking a phosphate off of what, if you recognize this, it's ATP. So this is actually the first part of ATP recycling, where the phosphate is broken off with water, which is hydrolysis. And that's where nutrient energy comes on where it comes in because we use that nutrient energy to rephosphorylate, put back on the phosphate, back onto that ADP compound. You're going to get sick of that theme by the end, but you're definitely going to understand the way cell muscles contract. In fact, that's my running example for this whole lesson. Starting with human anatomy. That's another one of your natural science courses that are required. And Bio 212 is what we need here at SDSU. And this one's required C or better to declare major. Human anatomy includes the gross and microscopic study of the organ system structures. And we do include all 11 organ systems. So you're going to learn about musculoskeletal, cardiorespiratory, central nervous, endocrine, urinary, reproductive, all of the 11 major organ systems. You're also going to get a lot of identification and terminology. So you're going to be learning all about learning where joints and muscles articulate, where they attach to the bone, different angles, all sorts of different things that require lots of memorization. So, for instance, you're going to learn about how human muscles are organized, and you'll learn about how, for instance, this is the bicep, and the bicep's broken up into a bunch of fibrils, and the fibrils are broken up into little teeny tiny what's called proteins that contract. So you're going to learn about the basic, I guess I got a little ahead of myself, but you're going to learn about basic structure of the muscle. Big muscle, bicep, muscle fiber, muscle fibril, which is just an individual muscle cell. So, for instance, how the muscles are organized. You'll go on in physiology to learn about how they work. So really the big differentiation here is in anatomy, you're learning structure, and in physiology, you're learning function. So you'll learn all of the different same organ systems, but you'll this time learn the different actions, mechanisms, steps, enzymes, processes. So, and you'll get a good conceptual understanding. You guys are freshmen, so hopefully he still teaches it, but Dr. Buono is the professor here at SDSU for human physiology, and it's Bio 336. He is amazing. His method is that he starts with a small process and builds on that process and keeps reminding you of it. So I won't be specific. I'll use this one that's on the thing. Motor unit, how it attaches to a motor unit on a muscle to make muscle cells contract. And I'll kind of show you in this video as I explain, and then I'll go back to how Dr. Buono does it because I can never pull it off like he does. But this is showing you what's happening. The central nervous system is sending a signal. It fires an electrical thing down to the muscles. It releases neurotransmitters. That causes this big rush of calcium to charge in, which a series of events causes those actin and myosin proteins to bind. That's calcium going into the muscle fiber. And then it's going to cause myosin and then to hook to tropomyosin, which has actin on it, which is another type of muscle protein. It pulls, and this process takes ADP, which is where ADP and ATP come in. To make that whole thing happen, it takes that ATP energy. So you're going to learn about that in this physiology class. So structure and anatomy, how it works in physiology. Now, back to how Dr. Buono does it, his method is very unique because he works with students on, say dot, he goes dot, circle. He draws everything too. Then he goes dot, circle, X, dot, circle, X, line, dot, circle, X, line, semicolon, dot, circle, X, line, semicolon, dash. And then he just keeps doing it to where by the end of an hour and a half, like, you have it absolutely memorized. I know it sounds crazy, but it's genius. Repetition is key, and he's funny and charming and wonderful, but you'll see when you get there. You'll love your human physiology class. Try to not navigate away from taking that at SDSU if you can. Statistics. So statistics includes the study of information sets. You're going to learn a lot of stuff in stats. It'll be delivered a number of ways. So whoever you have teaching it will maybe emphasize one of these areas more. But generally in stats, you're going to get things about error, things like accuracy and precision, validity, external and internal validity. And we'll talk more about these terms in ENS research. They're important when we talk about how we study human movement and diet. You'll also learn more in research also about looking at differences in research groups. That's an important thing. We don't just study groups descriptively, like let's look at averages and make general connections. We sometimes look at analytically the differences. We discern between groups. So we also do statistics to look at these statistically significant differences. And again, we'll talk more about p-values and what statistically significant differences mean when we talk about research. You'll also learn in stats. My favorite part about stats, the part I understood the easiest, was definitely about relationships and associations. I had a teacher that laid out things like, the more TV we watch, the more inclined we are to be overweight. And I was like, oh, that's a positive association. I get that. So I like learning about correlation, line of best fit, and things like that. It made a lot of sense. So you'll learn those concepts in statistics, but essentially it's looking at data. You're going to collect data in this subject and you're going to analyze it. And statistics is the baseline where you start learning that. Just for fun, if we were in a setting, I could survey you which of these words describes the term for this curve. And yeah, we're not together, so I don't have a result to look at, but it's normal distribution. Most of you haven't had stats, but one of the first things you'll learn is that to do any kind of statistical analysis, you have to have some assumptions about your data. And one of those assumptions is that it has to be normally distributed, meaning that it's representative of a sample population. And that's all we'll say for now, just for fun. Sample lessons. You'll also take human psychology, which is the study of human behavior. And depending on who you have for psychology, they'll emphasize, again, one or more of these subjects, but there are some people that love to talk about personality, different personality types, how that affects mood, chemical changes, personality disorders, etc. But there is also people that like to focus on pedagogy or looking at how the human brain learns. And then there's also people that love developmental psychology, which is how it changes with age or declines or regresses with disease. It goes both directions. So we also like to look at how psychological theories, and these are things that apply to us because we will in some way be responsible for understanding what motivates our client. Nobody wants to necessarily exercise or eat healthy. These are against natural human indulgences. So we have to coach them out of behaviors and habits. And so that is going to require us understanding some psychological theory. For instance, there's tons of these. I only pulled one out of a hat for a sample demonstration, but one of my favorites and one that I use in parenting and teaching is called the VIE theory, or the expectancy theory. And this is by a guy, let me think who came up with this. The expectancy theory, Vroom. I can't believe I just pulled that out. It's been a long time. I would never ask you that, but this guy named Vroom came up with this theory. And the concept is that people aren't going to be motivated if there's a disconnect between what the reward is. If the reward has to be valuable, let's give an example of a classroom grade. You want to know that if you put in the effort of studying and you have an expectancy that will earn you an A, and the link is there that A actually means something, because we can also have expectations, but it's not that important to us. And all of those things in a linear chain, you will satisfy your individual need, which in this theory, that's called valence. Now, again, I'm getting all super detailed here, but the point of this is that I really try not to break this chain of what I think students and my kids would expect. If I promise them that if you do this for 2 hours, this will happen, and I have to make that outcome mean something. In other words, if I tell you for 2 hours that you study and that you'll get an A and you don't, you get a C, but you did study for 2 hours, then I broke that, and your motivation to do it next time will be ruined. Or if I kept that when you got an A, but then I made the A insignificant in your overall grade and that ended up not meaning anything. There has to be that expectancy all the way through. So all of that has to be met for people to be motivated. And that's a simple theory, but that's kind of make you understand how to work with people and train them. I don't train people, so I don't have that expertise. Just out of curiosity, another popular psychological theory is this one. It's called Maslow's hierarchy. And Maslow came up with this concept that we satisfy our needs kind of one layer at a time in this hierarchy of like these really important ones up to these like little, self-actualization. They're less important. This is where you feel real good about yourself and things like that. Bottom, food, air, water. So my thoughts, because you'll train people and their motive and intent to train with you will be somewhere on this spectrum. If they want to live alone and they can't bathe and dress, then their needs are way here on the bottom. Physiological basic needs. If you're working with someone to do a Spartan event on a weekend with their college buddies, that's probably more up in the self-actualization, maybe love and belonging, if that's part of what they do to feel good about their social element. But where does your service, whether it's food and diet planning, maybe you want to work with people in like competitions and getting them extra lean at the end with diet, that's up higher. Or do you want to work with people with a tube in their arm in acute care at a hospital setting? That's way down there, physiological. So if I were asking you in a live setting, I do care on this spectrum where you see yourself working with people, because you have to see that too. So I want to articulate in some way, I want to get you thinking about that. We will bring this up in professions in part 3. When we talk about, I'm going to get you thinking about who you want to work with, this will come back up. You'll also take an introduction to sociology class, which I loved sociology, but you will have a wide variety of approaches people have in teaching this, and even sometimes from term to term, because right now if I taught sociology, I would probably have some different topics than I had in the past, because society has taken an interesting turn. Not much research on it yet for them to share, but certainly you'll see variation between talking about race, gender, sexuality, region, class, genetics, politics, economics. I mean, all sorts of topics are relevant in talking about sociology, because we all are broken up and segmented by those things. These topics are what make us groups. ENS core. So we've talked about those foundation sciences that are, again, satisfying those GE foundation areas. But these ones are professional and applied sciences and also still needed by all of you. That's why it's in this lecture called the core. But these are the ones that we're looking at for just looking at specializing in diet and exercise. And those include 3 courses or 3 disciplines: health promotion, exercise physiology, and the study of nutrition. So we're going to look at those 3 courses or subdisciplines. The first one is health promotion. So health promotion is a course where you're going to study epidemiological health, big wide-scale health initiatives, big wide-scale health problems. And so you're going to learn specifically about this one thing called Healthy People. Healthy People is the United States big goals for the population's health. So they find targets, like for instance, kids, and boy, do we have some interesting data to deal with on our hands now. Before we were like, they're not getting enough vegetables and they're probably getting more than 2 hours of screen time. Yeah, now I would be so happy if I could say that my kids only got 2 hours of screen time per day. So we're in an interesting zone. But Healthy People finds problems in society, epidemiologic problems, which just means large public scale. They find, by the way, if you've never heard of the subject of epidemiology, that's an area of graduate study also. You can get a master's in epidemiology and study wide-scale public health, wide-scale disease. People in nutrition and kidney sometimes go in that direction. But anyway, needs, targets, initiatives, how to get the population healthier. So one of your first assignments, and it's a little mini assignment, and I will post in Blackboard a way for you to post your response as a discussion forum, but I want you to look up the Healthy People goals and objectives. And I thought I had the link posted here. Nope, I don't. Well, if you Google Healthy People 2020, it's a CDC initiative, so it's a Center for Disease Control. You can't miss it. You'll land on a page that says Healthy People objectives. If you're nutrition, I'd probably scroll down to like the nutrition and weight objectives, and if you're exercise science, you're going to scroll over to the physical activity ones. Take a look at a couple of those goals that the nation has set for us to get healthy. Those are the things that you're going to learn about in ENS 434, your health promotion class. What kind of things are the problems? We're not getting enough resistance exercise. We're not eating enough vegetables. We're eating too much sugar. And these aren't shocking or anything, but it is fun to look at how it's being addressed. For instance, yes, we know kids get too much sugar. Yes, we know that we should reduce that, and that's a goal. But one of the ways that they're going about that, an initiative, is to have from 19% of schools that serve sugary drinks at lunch, they're going to reduce that down to 8%. And so those are the things they can't control. They can go in and cut those types of juices out of schools that are paid for by commodity and lunch services. So it's just one example, but the government has identified problems. They come up with these programs, and then they're through the people they're trying to target and fix. So nutrient needs. We have basic biological nutrient needs. It's very physiological. Blood nutrient levels drop. Brain is signaled by the stomach with the hormone ghrelin, and it's like we start smelling food and thinking about food and eating food, and we get ourselves to food. So that we have a natural way of self-regulating that. However, because our appetite oftentimes overrides our biological need, We are oftentimes imbalanced in our nutrition system. But nutrient needs we know, and they're also determined. If I linked you out right now, you would see something called the DRI, the Dietary Reference Intake. It's basically like the world's report of daily nutrient needs. And it outlines it for these 6 major nutrients showing right here: carbs, fat, water, protein, vitamins, and minerals. Pretty simple stuff, but lots of research that goes into those few summary tables of how much of each of these to get per day. And we'll talk more about that as time goes on. And of course, you'll learn more in your nutrition class, which is what this is about. I'm not your nutrition teacher. I just get excited, like I said. Nutrition sources. So you're going to learn also about food sources like whole foods, maybe plant foods, apples, fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds. You'll also learn about animal foods. So different ways that we acquire animal foods are milks, their eggs, and their whole flesh, whether it's bones with little sardine bones, bone marrow, whether we're steeping it out in a soup, or I was going to say stew and soup at the same time. That was hard. We also are going to learn about food extracts and derivatives. And I think this is where students kind of get lost on nutrition, because you're like, what is wheat germ? It was just that we took the wheat, big tall cereal grass. You'd never recognize it. It looks like just a big grass. And we took the seed out of that. And then we took that little portion and took the germ layer out, which is just this one little oily portion in the middle, and we sold it to you. And then we took the rest, the endosperm in the middle, ground it into flour, added some vitamins to it, enriched flour. Okay, I'm getting a little too comfortable now. This is what happens at home. You're also going to learn about formulated foods and supplements. So for instance, this one's a good one. You take corn, you take the starch in corn, which is not sweet at all, but you take cornstarch and you isomerize it, which means that you convert those starches to sugars, and then you got syrup. And then you do it a little bit more, and so that it's an unnatural form, and you have high fructose corn syrup. So now it has more fructose than glucose, which is unnatural. So anywho, you'll also learn about those kind of things in your nutrition and food science curriculum. Quick foodie trivia, but we're not together. Which of these is not technically a fruit? So I was hoping you would touch on the pea, and that's kind of easy, I guess, looking at these, but sometimes people do erroneously touch avocado and sometimes tomato, which we commonly know as vegetables, but they're both technically fruit, because you can see the seed is being protected by some flesh. And in the case of the pea, the pod is not the flesh, it's actually just the casing for the seed. You're also going to learn in nutrition about nutrient processing, things like the processing systems, like the digestive system, the signaling system, circulatory and metabolic systems, and then the activities within there. So learning again about metabolic pathways, routes of circulation where nutrients travel, where it goes after it's absorbed, like to the liver, what happens to it, etc. So you'll learn about how nutrients are processed in the body. You'll also learn about how the functions of nutrients. So we talked last time about how nutrients are used to rephosphorylate ATP. So that's how the chemical energy in food is transformed into thermal energy and kinetic energy in the body. So the kinetic energy that we use when we're breaking down ATP and we're using nutrition to rephosphorylate it, we use that kinetic energy to build. So I put Legos here, it makes perfect sense. We're literally just, recreating cells all day long. So the biosynthetic process takes a huge amount of the ATP that we consume each day. Huge amount of ATP also takes to get stuff in and out of the cell. The brain is pumping in glucose all day long with ATP pumps, and those take a ton of energy. So that's another way that we use ATP. We also, for muscle contraction, we just looked at it a few slides back on human physiology. Contraction takes this reaction, it's electrical, it releases neurotransmitters, and that whole communication process and that hook pull takes a ton of ATP. So those are just a few of the ways that nutrients function, because we can't rephosphorylate ATP, and we know that because we're weak when we don't have enough nutrition. Why are we weak? Because we aren't properly phosphorylating ATP. So we don't have that same energy to do all those things. Nutrient status. So another area you'll learn about in nutrition is how to measure nutrient status. So are we even? Because if we are, everything's perfect in that outcome area. But what happens if we don't get enough or if we get too much? So some of the things that we'll learn about is, say for instance, someone's a habitual snacker, which leads to excess calorie intake, leads to changes in the amount of fat they're synthesizing, leads to increased fat stores or adipose tissue. The feedback part, which is coming in last, is what we talked about last time. It's how we measure that, how we assess that, how we use that information to go back to the habitual snacking and say, you're not quite meeting the standards for one of these composition measures: body fat, weight, height, or body mass index, weight for height. Another example in the opposite direction. I'm a vegan. That's actually a pretty healthy, good principle. But a lot of times they're deficient certain nutrients like protein, vitamin B12, occasionally calcium. So low calcium intake from vegan diet leads to increased gradual and slow bone breakdown to maintain and keep calcium levels in the blood perfect. And that's important because calcium levels in the blood are the only reasons that our muscles contract. Remember back on that physio slide, one of the compounds rushing in was calcium. So we need calcium in the blood just to make our muscles contract properly. It's bigger than just hard bones. And with this, we could measure that by looking at their bone density. So we could do an MRI scan, look at the density and go, oh my gosh, you chronically had low calcium in your diet. It's slowly taken from your bone to keep that blood calcium maintained. So nutrient status is an important part of the subject of nutrition. And that really is where the clinical elements come in, because that's where you measure these things. We'll talk more about this in research. So now we switched. That was a lot on nutrition because we couldn't survey which one we wanted to learn. So I had to teach you all of those 5 areas, but this will be quicker because I plan to briefly talk about all of these. But exercise physiology is the study of exercise responses and adaptations. And both those keywords there are important. Responses, like acute responses, like what's happening right now, and adaptations, like what's happening in the long term after repeated exposure. So the first thing to talk about is the 2 different types of exercise. We've already kind of touched on this, but you've got aerobic at those lower and moderate intensities and anaerobic, real high power intensities. So of course, a function of time is, based on intensity, because you can't do those high power ones for very long. So by nature, they're usually done for a very short duration. So the study of exercise physiology, we're looking at those responses and adaptations in those different body systems. So for example, you would learn about metabolic responses. So you would learn about right off the bat energy systems and how right when you start doing exercise, depending on the intensity, you immediately use your PCR system. So your PCR is your stored form of ATP. It's called the phosphagen system because it's just sitting there ready for needed high intensity bursts, probably for like hunting, grabbing a snake back in the day. So phosphorylated creatine is sitting there, but it doesn't last long. Within the first minute of exercise of high intensity, you've depleted that system, and then your glycolytic system kicks in. The glycolytic system definitely firing really good in the red or fast twitch muscle fibers. It's firing for maybe 60 to 120 seconds of those high intensity contractions, and then that starts to build up lactic acid and burn. So as exercise intensity drops a little, as exercise intensity drops a little bit, and you're able to maintain oxygen and get oxygen to the muscles, the oxidative system kicks in. And this is what's used for prolonged exercise. And this system utilizes more of the white twitch or slow twitch fibers. These are more oxidative. And they're whiter because they have less myoglobin, which holds iron, so it's red, but they have more mitochondria. So one of the things that you'll learn about, I know that's a lot, but you'll learn about the metabolic responses. When you start exercising, over time, this is the nature of the energy systems that your cell's using. And when we talk about energy systems, you're like, what are you talking about? These are the systems that are used to rephosphorylate ATP. It can either be done through glycolytic pathways or the oxidative pathways, but at the end of the day, we're rephosphorylating ATP. Adaptation to that. So a little quick picture of fatty acid oxidation happens in where? If you're not familiar with this is very small, bad example, but I want to show you oxidation because this is the process of a fatty acid coming in to the mitochondria through the carnitine shuttle, which is why people take carnitine, by the way. They hope it helps with that process. Acetyl-CoA comes into the cell, and that happens in the mitochondria. And so what happens when you exercise over time is that you develop more mitochondria. Like we talked about last time, how after exercise you have increased protein synthesis. Well, one of those proteins that you're synthesizing more of are mitochondria. You'll also learn about the cardiovascular response to exercise. And I added here conveniently and endocrine because the endocrine system is definitely involved too. The endocrine system includes a bunch of different glands that release hormones, but in this instance, the one that's important is the adrenal gland, a little gland that sits on top of the kidney. Now, the kidney at the onset of exercises releases catecholamines, and the first one is epinephrine, which immediately stimulates heart rate. So epinephrine is released from the adrenal gland, and it causes a linear increase in heart rate with exercise intensity. So look how perfect that fit is. The more harder you're pushing on the exercise start, the more heart rate increases as time goes on. Very tight relationship there between that. And that's why sometimes we can use heart rate to determine exercise intensity, or we can use VO2, which is oxygen consumption, because they're literally related. So we don't need to measure both of them. We know their relationship. Another one is, actually, this is also epinephrine. I actually thought this was norepinephrine, but also epinephrine stimulates the constriction of our blood vessels. So we start immediately going, let's turn off all this blood flow to the liver. Most of the time, most of our blood is flowing to the liver, to the gut, to our intestines. And so it shuts all of that down and it starts directing to the muscles. So epinephrine causes the constriction in those guttural peripheral areas, and it increases that heart rate. Now, that's the response, initial, what happens over time. Well, we can see that as we adapt, as we're trained, and as the elite athlete level, our heart just starts to become more efficient. You don't have to necessarily release a bunch of epinephrine to get that heart going to keep up with exercise, because your heart has figured out a way to just ejaculate more in one. Because your heart has figured out a way to eject more blood in one pump, which is called the stroke volume. So if you look at it like a Lance Armstrong stroke volume, maybe in the early 2000s, but he probably has one of the largest stroke volumes ever, which goes hand in hand with his super low heart rate. He doesn't need a high heart rate because he's extremely efficient with the volume he pushes out in one contraction. So that's an adaptation to exercise. That's good. Our stroke volume improves. That improves the efficiency of our heart, requiring it to beat less times, which is good. We also have musculoskeletal and endocrine responses. You've seen this figure before. And this figure represents, we were looking last time at how nutrition is, important for performance. And we were talking about how after exercise, protein and carbohydrates are important because it takes amino acids and it takes insulin, which is triggered by carbohydrate intake. So we talked a little bit about that. You've seen this figure. But in this one, we're looking at what happens right after exercise. The immediate response is the pancreas releases insulin because you just ate and you've just exercised. And there's this huge cascade of events that cause an increase in muscle protein synthesis. And if you've noticed, I'm bringing up the same topics. I'm keeping with the same ones because we'll just keep building on those in module 2. And when we do practice and fake research examples, we can use this topic because you're all familiar with it at this point. So you have these musculoskeletal responses, like right after exercise, pancreas is doing its job. We're definitely synthesizing new muscle proteins, maybe fibers, and in this example, muscle fibers. Now, the adaptation to that over time is that the muscle cells change. The muscle fibers change. They increase in size, called hypertrophy, and they increase in number, called hyperplasia. So this adaptation, this is what we see. This is what we measure with a tape measure. This is what we feel good about. And we're like, dude, I can see that. I can see that horseshoe on my tricep. That is adaptation that happens over time. So the post-exercise muscle protein synthesis was acute or an immediate response. The adaptation is change in the musculature. Muscle size, muscle cell number increases. So thank you. That's all I have for you guys. We'll talk next time.